Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, since the unveiling of the government's plan to phase the easing of the lockdown restrictions, attention has now turned to how businesses need to plan for their reopening. As it's widely accepted that a return to business as normal may be unattainable for the time being, the National Standards Authority of Ireland has published guides aimed at assisting businesses to plan their operations for life after lockdown. Geraldine Larkin, the CEO of the NSAI, joins us now to tell us more about these useful guides. But first, Geraldine, what role is the NSAI playing in supporting employers through the COVID-19 crisis?
Good morning, Karl. So, Karl, the NSAI, as a state agency, have come together and written a number of guides to provide practical advice to businesses, big and small, and how they can navigate their way through this crisis.
From a practical perspective, how has that been done?
So from a practical perspective, we have a broad range of expertise, and we've pulled all that expertise together to write two guides. The first one in response to manufacturing, the second in the area of retailing. And those two guides are structured in and around about advising businesses what they do to defend against an incident of COVID-19 in the first instance in terms of physical distancing, etc. Then secondly, how to respond in the event of exposure to a case. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, how then they should get their business back up and running again, such that they're minimising disruption to the business and obviously then financial disruption as well.
And Geraldine, has the NSAI been contacted by many employers across the country that are looking for some guidance about reopening their business?
Yes, we've had in excess of 500 queries in the last number of weeks on foot of both of these guides. And those employers are looking for information on how to implement the guides in more detail. They're looking also for advice, and sometimes the advice is coming from, the queries are coming from employees looking to know why an employer might have adopted a particular route, or indeed looking for assistance in terms of enforcement of the measures. Now, we're not an enforcement authority, and in those cases we advise employees that contact us to direct their queries to the Health and Safety Authority, who of course have legal inspection authority.
And what practical advice can you share with employers this morning?
I think the first advice is to prepare. Start now. Start thinking about what their businesses are going to look like in the future. And to this end, we've produced the new how-to document that takes all the high-level policy that has been issued by the HSA and translates that into real practical things that an employer can do before they go back to work. Once they go back to work, it's very important that activity remains dynamic, and that employers are constantly reviewing what they're doing, is it effective, and ensuring that they're continuing to safeguard against future exposure. The last thing I would advise employers to do is to communicate. Appoint a dedicated resource within your business, no matter how small your business is. That's the person that is the go-to in terms of issues going forward. But also then use that person to communicate with staff before they go back to work, and then on a regular basis at work as things are changing.
What level of work is involved for employers to be able to implement these?
Karl, this very much depends on the actual business and indeed the actual clientele and customers of any particular business. And the most crucial part of this that I cannot emphasise enough is to think in advance, to prepare in advance to achieve social distancing, to look at are there changes within the normal business that can actually mean that you can do a lot more? For instance, can some staff continue to work remotely or even commence working remotely such that there are not as many people in the facility, in the premises? It's also about changing mindsets, changing habits, and that's not just exclusive to employees. It also extends to customers. And the guides that we've produced attempt to offer practical advice in that, particularly our most recent guide in terms of how you can achieve these distancing.
And I'm also conscious, Geraldine, that for businesses having to go about changing systems and procedures and to put the relevant social distancing measures in place, there could be a cost involved in doing so. Are there any grants available to assist businesses in that regard?
Yes, indeed, because we ourselves don't have aren't a funding agency, but because we've worked closely as a state body with our counterparts in IDA, Enterprise Ireland, the local enterprise offices and indeed the Ross na Gaeltachta, all have grant assistance available to support the changes, the costs of the changes needed in these documents. And there's details within the documents of the context for all those organisations as well. So this is very much an all-of-government approach.
Are you aware if the local enterprise office business continuity grant would cover this relevant implementation?
Yes, and I regularly engage with all the local enterprise offices, and indeed have got quite an amount of feedback from the enterprise offices in the formulation of these guides in the first instance.
So, provide us with an insight into the content of the workplace and retail protection and improvement guides.
So, all the guides are designed around defending, dealing with exposure and then recovery. So, it explains how you address risks to the public, how you, and then goes into very specific detail in terms of the retail guide. So, it looks at cleaning of trolleys, how you achieve physical distancing within supermarkets, signage, floor markings, looking out to warehouses, how you zone a warehouse, how you have to change your delivery mechanisms such that your deliveries and your delivery personnel are achieving social distancing. The very practical things that we've all become accustomed to in terms of setting up screens and barriers, tills, allowing people to socially distance while queuing, say maybe at the deli counter, the public announcements, increased use of hand sanitisers, all of these very, very practical measures.
Now, should restructuring of shifts and zoning of retail areas be a primary target for retailers when they reopen?
The primary target has got to be social distancing, mitigation of cross-contamination. So what you've described are means to achieve that. Then it's a matter of looking at how the social distancing and cross-contamination mitigation impacts upon your business, and then taking measures to reduce that. It could be even something as simple, for instance, as if there's two stairwells in a building, making sure that there's one-way traffic around the building, up one stairs, down the other.
And if an employee in a retail environment is feeling particularly anxious about interacting with members of the public because of COVID-19, how should this be handled by the employer?
The employers will have to be mindful of employees that have genuine underlying conditions that might put them into a vulnerable category, and consider how those employees will be managed and catered for. And I think that's where the communication and conversations that I described earlier are crucially important in ensuring that. So there's an obligation as well on employees to launch that in conversation, to launch that with employers. I think employers are trying to do their best. There's a responsibility on both parts to bring this forward, because we all need to work together to get the economy going again.
And of course, County Wexford is synonymous with tourism and hospitality. I'm conscious that social distancing is probably the biggest risk for those businesses. What advice specifically have you got for them?
I mean, there is no doubt about it that the hospitality area is facing more challenges than all others. It again goes back to, can you achieve social distancing? What can you do to ensure the confidence of your patrons visiting in the future? Because I think it's a challenge to balance, on the one hand, the need to reopen with the associated issue of building confidence that the product that's being offered is safe.
Now, we've seen some very interesting initiatives implemented in other countries, one of which, for instance, in Portugal, where they're branding businesses safe businesses because of the relevant guidelines that they're meeting. Do you envisage that something like that should be brought in here?
Well, if it were to be brought in, we certainly would be well placed to support that from a state agency perspective. I think whatever measure helps us change our mindsets is important and useful.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Geraldine Larkin, the CEO of the NSAI, and I would like to thank Geraldine for sharing this advice with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast.